Hey, y'all. Welcome to Therapy Tea. I'm Jasmine.
And I'm Karen.
We're two licensed professional counselors from Texas, just trying to break down, demystify, and better understand the mental health field and all that it encompasses.
Here, we get candid with other professionals, find out what they wish they had known sooner, and explore what it's really like to work in mental health. Let's get started.
Hey, Karen.
Hey, Jasmine.
Here we go. What are we doing today?
Well, today we're going to sort of pretend like we're in school. I
Ooh,
feel like this is
yay.
totally something that we have done before in our master's program, where we have to walk through an ethical dilemma and figure out a decision to make. And so, something that we thought might be interesting to do for an episode is go through an ethical decision making model together about this podcast and just record our process and
Oh my
record that
gosh.
process.
Going back to ethics class. It's
That's
everyone's
right.
favorite thing. It's everyone's favorite class is the most exciting class. I don't know. Our class, well, I don't know if we'd class together, but
We
my
didn't.
class was pretty cool.
No, mine was not
Wait,
that
no, it
cool.
wasn't. Wait, no, it wasn't because I did not have the right person. I was thinking I had the former ethics chair because that was one of our
That's not who
teachers.
I had. I know.
That's actually not who I had, which is so funny.
No.
I remember having her initially because I think she's like the first one that comes up. Like we had a
Yeah.
professor at Texas State who was the former ethics chair of I think ACA and TCA or something.
Maybe
I don't know.
PCA. I think
But
PCA.
she's a just dynamo person. Like she just does all the things, but one of the things that she did was ethics, and she currently like presents on ethics. You went to one of her ethics seminars pretty recently,
Mhm.
or one of the ones that she helps host and then she presents at. I went last year. It was fantastic. She's great. But I remember having it with her, and that's not true. I just think about her. I didn't have it with her. I had it with a play therapist. And it
Yeah, I
was
had mine with an adjunct.
oh, good. Great. That one was really good then. I think mine was
Yeah.
probably better than yours. What did you get out of ethics class? Like, in a nutshell, if you could describe your ethics class, like, what is the thing that you got out of it?
You know, I didn't necessarily hate that class. I think that the content is actually interesting. Like, I find ethical dilemmas interesting. I like wrestling with decision making. So I'm not disinterested in it as a topic. I think what I kind of got out of that class, though, was that this is a self study sort of topic for me
Okay.
because I don't like being read to when I'm
Okay.
literate. So I felt like that class was one of the classes I took where maybe an inexperienced professor was sort of reading out loud from the PowerPoint. And I was like,
Okay.
I could have done this at home
Right.
from a book.
Didn't need to be here till 9:30 PM for you to
Correct.
read the ACA Code of Ethics
Out
off
loud.
of a PowerPoint out
Yeah.
loud.
Right. Right. Right.
I think
Right.
the thing that so shout out to any adjunct professors or like wannabe adjunct professors who are out there right now. Make your class interesting. And let's
Yeah.
know where we are. Cause I had an adjunct and the one thing that I remember about that class is that she said, if you're 5 minutes late, I will count you absent. I said, ma'am, what?
I'm a grown up.
I am coming up on 30 years old. Like I'm paying for this class
Yeah.
out of my paycheck you get my paycheck every month. I'm pretty sure I can be 5 minutes late. And it's not that big of a deal. And I think you're going to count me here. And also, who's trying to win perfect attendance? Anyway, whatever. Talk about ethical. Ugh. Maybe she should have been in that class. Anyway, I had my ethics class with a play therapist. She's wonderful. She like kind of became my mentor towards the end of my graduate career. I think you probably know who I'm talking about, Karen. She was absolutely lovely. Not like the hardest of lines. Like
Mhm,
she was
mhm.
very, what do you think about this? Which I appreciate. I really
Totally a
appreciate, but I
play
feel
therapist.
like, yes, I feel like in, and I remember feeling this way in that class too. In this sense, I need you to just tell me what the rules are. I don't want to know what my interpretation of the rules are, because I don't think the board is really going to care about my interpretation of the rules. One, I would say, like, the most important takeaway that I got from that class though is consult, consult, consult.
Yeah,
Like, if you're not sure, consult with
yeah,
someone else.
yeah,
Consult with a few people, which I think is really valuable, actually.
absolutely.
So,
Totally
and I think
valuable.
that's kind of how I approach ethics now, is like, if I have something going on that I'm really not sure about, I'll just ask.
Yeah,
And because I know that that's what I'm supposed to do. That was the one clear thing, I think.
yeah,
And, like,
yeah.
don't fuck your clients.
For real
Like,
though, and look, you mentioned the conference that I just went to. That's still the most common ethical violation. It
w-
blows my mind. It blows everybody's mind every year. It's nuts. But as you're talking about, like, what you left with, and you had asked me the same thing, I think one of the most interesting, um, assignments that I got in my ethics class was what we had to do was kind of watch, a particular movie that had a therapist portrayed in it.
ooh, nice.
It's just like it was just a regular kind of blockbuster type movie, and it happened to have a therapist in it. And our assignment was to watch this movie and then to identify every single ethics violation in the movie. And I thought that was a really enjoyable assignment. I thought it was a really
Yeah.
useful assignment, actually. So we had to actually identify every ethical violation, the specific code that was violated, the specific law that was violated, etc. And so
Okay.
I thought
That's
that was
really
a really
neat.
good, yeah, assignment. And I think it really helped solidify the process that we're going to go through a little bit today, which is not just not just thinking about an ethical dilemma and then asking somebody's opinion, which is totally important too, but
Mhm.
to actually engage with the rules that are actually written down, right? To actually
Right.
read them and consider them. Are they being violated? Are they not?
Yeah.
Right. And so that, I think, exercise helped me also form how I handle ethical decisions, where consultation is a part of that,
Mhm.
but also, like, pulling out the code of ethics and looking through these things as opposed to just trying to pretend like I still remember what they are, because I don't.
Right.
I don't have them
'Cause
memorized.
I mean, but don't you though? Don't you
No.
have
You would
all
think I would,
sections?
since the last one was published in 2014. You would think
Mm,
by now it's almost been 10 years. Actually,
right.
we're coming on 10 years, right?
It is. I mean,
Right?
depending on what month, I guess.
Yeah,
Which I
yeah.
would assume it's
So
like January, February. So yeah, it's 10 years. This thing is 10 years old.
maybe
We
we
have
should have it
moved,
memorized.
like, in Texas at least, we have moved from, like, we've moved to BHEC at this point, and, like, what even does that mean? And but we're still using the same one, and
Mhm.
we still don't have licensure portability, even though we're all held to the exact same standards. So cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
write
One of the
your
things we
Congress,
talked about in that
people.
conference was how the codes are, and laws, but codes in general are reactive and delayed. And so
Mm,
inevitably, every code of ethics you're referring to is something that is delayed. It's out of date already the moment that it became published, and it's reactive generally. Like, so the stuff that makes it in there is oftentimes reacting to a particular problem or a particular situation. It's kind of like, one bad apple spoils the bunch. It's like
mhm.
we are reacting to the bad apple, and that's why that's in there sometimes.
So it's like
Yeah.
rules aren't needed until they're broken. Why, you don't really
Mhm.
know a boundary violation has been occurred until the boundary has been violated and there's a bunch of uncomfortable feelings that you're now having to deal with and you don't feel good. So
Yeah.
I'm all for that, but I think it's really interesting the whole it's outdated as soon because you're right. Like it's outdated as soon as it's published because things are just kind of constantly evolving and in a state of
Absolutely.
change. And there's such a complexity to ethics. I mean, just counseling in general.
Yes.
Everybody looks at it differently. There's a million different ways to help people. It's not like we're just like pumping it out.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, a perfect example of this outdated situation, which is part of why we're doing this activity on our podcast, is that there's no mention of podcasts in the
yeah.
code of ethics.
Oh my
It's just
God.
not even in there. It's not at all addressed. So we're just having to figure it out.
Maybe they'll react.
Yes, we are going to change the code of ethics.
They will react to us. Oh, let's hope not.
Oh, that makes me
I'm just
nervous.
flying. No one say anything. Okay.
Delete.
Okay. So, Karen, what is the ethical dilemma? What is the question that we're
Great.
trying to consult through today?
Great. Perfect. Perfect. First step is always to identify the problem. Like, what is the problem? What's the situation? What's the
Is there a
dilemma that you're
problem?
actually
Right.
wrestling with? Is there one? Um, I think we may see the problem or the dilemma differently, but the way I see it is the dilemma is really that we both are licensed counselors who are actively practicing. We
Mhm.
actively see clients in a therapeutic setting, and we are starting a podcast that is related to our profession.
Mhm.
And to me, that's the dilemma right there to work through. What are your thoughts?
I don't think we see it too differently. I
Okay.
think the question it would be I guess it's hard for me to put it into a question. We are addressing mental health feels like counseling, mental health, it feels so secretive almost. Like, we talk about on this show a lot,
Mm,
especially with like Alyssa Polanco. We talked to her about it quite a bit. Being a person, and Kim, I mean, but being a person
mhm,
and a counselor. And I think on our podcast, it's a little bit more person than it probably is counselor.
mhm.
Like, as far as our clients see us, I mean, I'm a very different counselor than I am a person.
Yeah.
And if a
Yeah.
client were to see and hear me on the podcast, totally fine. I think on the one hand, it might like enhance their idea of me as a person and in a like a good way, but it also might kind of change their perception of me because you never want to make it, in counseling, you never want to make it about you. Like that's kind of one of the tenets that I'm sure we'll talk about is counseling is not supposed to be about you, the counselor. Like you don't really have a place in the room. I mean, you do have you're the counselor. Like that's your place. You're not, but it's not about you. So I'm afraid that at one point, a client's going to hear this and then think, oh, like that's not who I have in my brain as who is helping me. So I guess similar, how is it going to affect my clients perception of me? Um I think that's the
Well,
that's the big one I struggle with.
I think what you're um seeing as a part of the dilemma, and I totally agree. And it's not just that we're doing a podcast that is about our profession generally, it's that we're doing a podcast that is about exposing or demystifying or opening up understanding about our profession. So we
Yeah.
are being this more real versions of ourselves, I suppose. We're
Mhm.
being ourselves, not
Mhm.
ourselves as therapists, but ourselves as people in this podcast. And we're also, creating, um, or not creating, but I don't know. I hate to use the word demystifying too many times, but
Ah, just do it. It's a cool word.
demystifying the profession itself. And so there's something about that could impact clients.
Right. Like, I don't know why, and maybe I could be wrong.
That's
I'm sure
to
we'll talk
wrestle
about
with,
it.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I keep going back to like non-maleficence. Like I think that's the thing that is fresh on my brain all the time. Like, is
Yeah.
this creating harm? Like
Okay. All right. Don't go there too
so
quick.
okay.
Don't go there too quick. So we're identifying the problem first, right? And
Okay, okay,
then
okay.
I think we've got a handle on that. Then the next step is to really look at those, what you were just referencing,
Mhm.
which is the foundational principles. So
Okay.
there's these foundational principles that are considered central to evaluating an ethical decision in our profession. So let's name them and then
Got
we'll
it.
kind of talk about them. You want to name them
Okay.
or you want me to name them?
I will name them.
Name them.
We
Go.
we got autonomy,
Hmm.
which is you can define them. Yeah, I think you're
Oh,
good at
okay.
that.
Okay. All right. So autonomy is about independence, self determination. To to my understanding, it has like kind of a couple of components. One is about assisting the client, right? As a therapist,
Mhm.
helping clients understand the concept of autonomy and how
Yes.
that looks for them. And then the other part of it is related to your sort of duty to ensure that the client has autonomy in this
Oh, yeah.
process,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
that they're informed, that they are making the decision for themselves, right? And so there's something about it that is particularly related to like what your goal is as a therapist with the client, but then another part of it is like what you're required to do as a therapist
Okay.
in them being informed.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Second one.
What's the second
We
one?
we got justice, not the
Okay.
clothing brand. This is different.
To be clear, we don't want anyone misunderstanding here, not the clothing brand.
This is ethics.
Right.
Clear.
So justice is really about kind of equity. It's not necessarily about equality, like everything is the same across the board.
Not
It's
real.
more about um, making sure that you're providing what a person needs that they need, right? So a good example might be a person who is a client who is blind. You
Mhm.
ensure that they have your forms in a format that they can understand them, right? Whether that's in Braille or some other format, or we read them orally to them, etc. So you would want to make sure that they have equal access to the information that you have on your forms. But
Mhm.
otherwise, you're going to treat them like you would any other client,
Right.
right? So that would be kind of what justice is about. And then there's this other component of justice that comes up a lot, I think, where we talk about things like social justice, kind of
Yes.
this like responsibility as therapists to care about justice in the world in this larger social way.
Yeah. That one's a tricky one. You're right, because it's not about equality, because that's unattainable. Equity, way more way more attainable. Love that. Love the separation between those. But I think a lot of the things that we talked about in when we talked about justice in my ethics class, and I think when we talk about justice in like I mean, I pretty much any ethics thing that I see or learn about, CEs, whatever, it's almost always towards like the social justice aspect of counseling, the activism part of counseling,
Yeah,
which I think those are two really different things,
I agree.
honestly.
I think
So
so too.
yeah, I don't know. Okay, number three.
Okay.
We'll get into that later, maybe or not. I don't know. We're moving on.
See.
Number three, beneficence.
Yeah. This is just
Easy
really
one.
our responsibility to care about their client, right? To care about
Yeah.
their welfare, to um this might be the prevention of harm
Yeah.
in general. So
Right. Do
your
what is
goal is
best
yeah,
or
better
that you
your
think is
client.
best, right, in the situation. Just don't hurt them.
Well, that
Okay.
that takes us to the next one, right?
Right, right. Then I think those flow. Number
To me,
3 and
they
number
flow.
4 really flow. Non-maleficence,
Yeah,
which
good
is
pronunciation there.
just beneficent,
What
which is
not?
just malefic wait, don't
Now you're
talk
now
about
you're
my
messing up the
pronouns.
pronunciation.
Don't talk about it because
Going
then
too
I will
far.
mess it up. So, beneficence and non-maleficence, not even 2 sides of the same coin. I would say they are the same side of the same coin in most cases. Non-maleficence, I'll even do this one because it's the easy one.
What about
Non-maleficence.
non-malfeasance?
What? Is that what it is? Oh my god. That's so embarrassing.
Well, I don't know. I I think it's a Caribbean sort of situation here.
I don't know, because now that I'm looking at that word, I feel like I'm saying a lot of L's and you're not. And
There's
whatever.
only one L.
Maleficent. You're right. I'm not saying it. Whatever. I like
I think you're saying it fine.
maleficence.
Yeah, it's good. All right, what is it? No, not
Non-maleficence.
how do you say it? What's the definition?
I'm just rolling it. I'm just rolling it off the tongue.
You're
It's fine. Whatever. Okay. Non-maleficence
Mhm.
is don't hurt your client or do the thing that is going to be the thing that is least likely to hurt them. Hurt, not just physical hurt, but like cause them harm of any
Right.
kind.
This
Um,
this aligns with the doctor's do no harm
yes.
principle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. So not only do no harm, but also try to do the thing that is going to be good.
Do the
Don't
good
just
thing.
do nothing. Yeah. Don't just do nothing. Do the thing that is going to be good, benefit the client. All right.
Right.
Last one, number 5. We have fidelity.
Yes. Yes, this is about loyalty, faithfulness, honoring your commitments. This is really about, being able to kind of have trust, right? To say that trust is a vital component in a relationship, in a therapeutic relationship. So this, I think, also ties in with things like, not abandoning your client, not making ridiculous threats, being trustworthy, being loyal, and confidentiality, I think ties in with this one, right? Respecting a
Oh,
client's
yeah.
privacy and maintaining confidentiality. This goes with fidelity too.
Yeah. You deal with a lot with fidelity when, or at least I do. I deal a lot with fidelity questions whenever I am seeing an adolescent. I really love
Mm.
seeing adolescents.
Yeah, minors.
But if you are dealing with
Mhm.
minors, or even if you're doing like child parent stuff, because sometimes, especially with insurance, like you have to like treat even though you're treating it's like client not present. So you have to like treat the parent to treat the child.
Yeah,
Um, Anyway, insurance and ethics, not the same, but, as a counselor, you do a lot of the time, especially if you are gonna take insurance, you do have to kinda balance both, but fidelity, I think, is particularly important for people who see minors of any kind, um, or people who have developmental issues, or, like, developmental delays or something like that, like, I see some people who have autism, and, like,
yeah,
it's different, depending on, like, the level of functionality and, like, how do you navigate that? There's no answer. Just spoiler alert.
yeah,
There is no answer. I think, I try to just go back to the non-maleficence and beneficence thing,
yeah,
when I deal with that. But, yeah, confidentiality and teens, especially, is huge, and you deal with it all the time.
for sure.
Um,
Well, how do you
thing
see how these 5, like, when we go back to the sort of problem or dilemma that
Okay.
we've identified, which of the 5, like, kind of pops out as obviously related or obviously important to spend more time on?
Okay.
Or how does each one connect?
Okay. I'm going to go through them. Autonomy. I'm not really sure that our podcast really impacts the idea of at least client autonomy in any way. In fact, I think it actually enhances it in some way. Oh, you have a question?
Well,
Go.
enhancement is an impact. So,
Oh my
right?
God, you're right. How silly of me.
But
Um,
but here's how I see autonomy, right? On this issue is I think that we would potentially be violating our client's autonomy if they did not know about the
oh,
podcast potentially, right?
okay.
Right? Because
Okay.
we
Yeah.
would have better autonomy. We would be protecting or we would be honoring their autonomy by allowing them to know, hey, by the way, as a therapist, I do also have this podcast that I'm doing, and it's, somewhat about the profession. It's not about you, client, right? But
Hmm.
letting them know ahead of time, that way they can make the autonomous decision of whether or not they want to be in therapy with me.
I think that's a whole
The way I
other
see
question all
client.
on its own.
For
Like,
sure.
should I tell my client that
I
I'm on
know.
a podcast, right?
I know. That's
Does
where
it
it comes
matter?
up to me.
Ah, God, I didn't even know how deep we were getting. This lake is deep. Okay. This is not a puddle. This is a damn lake. Okay. Justice. I think as far as so I'm glad we made the differentiation between justice for the client, like equity
Mhm.
slash the social activist part of this,
Yeah.
of like being a counselor, because on that front, on the latter, I definitely think it's a thumbs up.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
I think
nodding,
we're
I agree.
doing good with that one. I don't know how
Totally
this would
this.
affect equity. I think this is more of a
Yeah,
of the client.
yeah, I agree. I don't know how doing the podcast would have I'm not seeing how justice is, a big
Yeah.
part of this just because we're either doing it or we're not, right? And it's
Right.
either available to people or it's not, right? It's not that's not up to us.
Yeah.
Um
No control.
I think there's something actually the way this interacts is in the social justice area,
Okay.
right? Where we are talking about the profession. And I think in many ways, part of our focus is on actually making the profession more kind of equitable because it's more in the light, right? It's more exposed.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's more something that people understand because of who we're talking to and the topics that we're trying to touch, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it
Check.
does interact with that. Okay.
A little bit, but just a check on that one.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. Got it.
Beneficence
Yeah.
or beneficence, as Karen would say. Beneficence.
Totally
Uh,
meant it because I knew it would throw you off.
okay. Beneficence. How is this, like, are we making this decision to do this podcast to open up our counseling world to the client? Is this good for
Yeah, I
them? Is
think the
this the
question
best
is,
thing?
does this contribute to the
Mm,
welfare of clients? And I think our goal is that it will. Yeah.
yes, I agree. I
Right?
agree.
That's certainly our hope, right? And our
Yeah.
intention is that by this content being out there, that it will actually contribute to the welfare of clients. Clients will be more informed about
Yeah.
what the mental health profession is, what are the different um, careers within it. They may be able to better select a professional for them
Right.
just by having listened or learned about this. Um, yeah, I think that's totally a part of our goal.
I think there's also benefit in humanizing
Uh,
therapists,
That's a good
because I mean, then because the more you humanize a therapist, or counselor, whatever,
yeah.
the more understanding I think clients will be. If you have to cancel because you have a
Mm,
life, and
yeah.
like, the more human you are, the more understanding is lent to you, I think.
Yeah.
Because you feel more related. It doesn't feel like, you always have all your shit together. Because I think I
Yeah.
get that a lot, especially with like, again, my teen clients, like they think that, oh, you always got it together, or like they think I can kind of do no wrong. Or the clients who have been with me for a really long time, they're just like, I feel like a lot of the time they don't really see me as a person
Yeah.
who has problems and who like
Not perfect.
struggles
Yeah.
and sometimes doesn't know what they're doing. So I think
Yeah.
this is really good. It's a good reminder that I'm a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have all the person accessories, like
Yeah,
all
and
of
I
them.
can see that being a useful thing for clients to have that perspective of mental health professionals, that they are
Mhm.
also humans who are imperfect, who don't know
Right.
everything, you know, who are trying the best that they can in this profession, right? In this space.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So check. Non-maleficence slash non-malfeasance.
Okay. Um, so do no harm.
Don't
I
hurt
think
them.
don't hurt them.
The
I think in order
intention
to
is
yeah,
definitely not there,
correct,
which I
correct.
think is really important.
Yes. Yes. But it's not just about intention, right?
You're
Like
right.
this value is to say, like, we need to avoid actions that cause harm.
Okay.
And
So
so
I think
what that means is,
yeah.
what is the potential harm that we could cause and how can we avoid it, right? And that's
Potential.
to me the
Potential being the operative word.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Because our intention is not to cause harm, but our duty then is to consider what is potential harm
Yeah.
and how can we mitigate that or prevent that, right? And so I think
Right.
then the thing that we need to break down, and maybe we save this for a little bit later in our conversation because this is where digging into the codes and things like that is going to help
Okay.
us. But like really trying to identify what are the potential harms, if any.
Mhm. Right.
And because I do think there probably are some, like we could come up with some pretty crazy scenarios in which it's harmful or it could be harmful to a
Oh, yeah.
client. Right. And so if we could like break down some of those potential harms and then say, okay, but here's how we're going to mitigate them, or here's how we're
Mhm.
going to make sure that they don't occur.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the one that immediately comes to mind is, I mean, is the fidelity part. We're gonna get into fidelity, but like, is the confidentiality piece. Like,
Mm,
as far
yeah.
as mitigating potential harms, I think keeping non-maleficence would be keeping fidelity, confidentiality in mind all the time. Because as a counselor, when you're talking about your job, you're talking about people's lives most of the time. And
Right.
while that's not what we're really trying to do, it's not like stories from counseling days. That's part of my job. Like that's my whole job. So if I'm
Right.
talking about my job, you're kind of just constantly skirting that line. So
Yes.
keeping identifying information in mind, really straying away from those kinds of things. Any kind of specifics, we talk more in general stuff.
Yeah.
So while we're on it, let's just go into fidelity.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, I think this has to do with, for me, what comes up about fidelity in this has to do with honoring like the commitments that we've already made. Right. And to
Mhm.
me, what comes up is the fact that I already have clients, right? Like
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
come first and the podcast is coming second. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Right? Like,
Right.
so I've already made a commitment, um, and I have a therapeutic relationship that I have to honor and be faithful to first because
Right.
we predate this
Yeah.
endeavor.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's to me the thing that comes up, right? Is that I have to kind of prioritize those commitments that predate this this plan, right?
Okay.
This activity.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think just keeping confidentiality in mind
Mhm.
the whole time.
Yeah.
Trying to just And when it does come up, because we're also in charge of like editing and things like that, so also keeping it in mind for other people, because you can
Sure.
only control yourself. You can't control what other people say. So in the editing process, also keeping that in mind. If someone says something that's even remotely in that gray area, cut it. Just cut it.
Yeah. 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 So you're talking about how this also kind of connects to how we edit our interviews.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
So good basis. No, that's okay. Okay.
Okay, here's what I want to pause on real quick. So,
Pause.
something that I want to pause on is what is our kind of ethical decision making model, right? So,
Okay.
we can kind of decide how are we going to approach this dilemma? What's the model that we're going to walk through? There's a couple of different ones that I like and that I sometimes pull out. There's
Mhm.
one that is really easy to access that the American Counseling Association has kind of created a lot of resources based on this particular um, ethical decision making model.
Mhm.
And they have all sorts of resources on their general website and um, kind of break down each of the steps. And the steps are kind of long, right? There's like 7 steps. Okay. And I'll just read them out real quick.
Okay.
And then I'm going to also talk about a different decision making model that I learned about recently. So, the
Okay.
ethical decision making model that the ACA kind of talks about that we can totally walk through if we want to includes first, identify the problem, then apply the ACA code of ethics,
Mhm.
then determine the nature and dimensions of the dilemma, and then 4, generate potential courses of action. And then 5, consider the potential consequences of all options and determine a course of action. And then 6, evaluate the selected course of action. And then 7, implement the course of action.
God. Okay.
It's a lot of steps, right?
Is
Whew. Okay. So,
you lost me at like number 3. I just and then the last one was like do the thing.
right?
So, I
Does that
missed
need to
out.
be a step?
Right?
So, there's only 6 then. Look forward to that.
Okay.
Okay, so this other decision-making model that I learned about really recently in this conference I just went to is really new and was apparently designed sort of reacting to the fact that professionals get that sense of, "Whoa, that's a lot of steps,"
I know.
to the decision-making models that are taught in school, right? They're like
Snooze fest.
6, 7, 8, 9 steps,
Right.
long, and it's
This is
like
why ethics gets a bad name.
yeah, and the reality is like when you're in a session, for example, and some sort of ethical dilemma comes up, you don't have time to
No.
go through all of those steps. Like the truth is you just don't.
Right.
And so that's a real problem out in the field when you're actually, being a professional and you're no longer a graduate student, you're having to like make ethical decisions like now, right now. And you don't get to sit down with your textbook and your printed code of ethics and like go through
Right.
everything. You have to like make a decision today. And so some researchers tried to develop an ethical decision making model that is a brief ethical decision making model. And it's very new, it's recently developed. I don't know. I have not been able to find the actual published version of it. The professor brought it up and said it's soon to be published. So I'm going to read it
My
out.
God. This
It's
is
based,
like pre-published. Whoa. You heard it
I
here
know.
first, folks. You heard it here first.
uh,
Wow, this is really exciting.
if
This
you
is like
didn't go to
making
the
me
conference, you're hearing it here first.
Oh, man.
So it's based on like an acronym. So an acronym of the word ethics supposed to help you remember this better. So the
Yet
steps
another
include
acronym.
I we love them.
Yet
What are you
another.
gonna do? What are you gonna do about it? Okay. So here are the steps in this one. E, examine your ethical principles.
Which we
T,
did. Check.
trust your clinical judgment and experiences.
I love
A,
that one.
have a conversation with your client about the ethical dilemmas.
Okay.
I, instigate a safety plan for your client and yourself if needed, in parentheses.
Okay.
C, code of ethics. You may need to consult or review it. And then S, self-reflect on your potential decision. Consider like what's coming up for you. What would your supervisor say? In here, I insert the particular name of a particular professor, like WWJD, but you know, it's this professor. What would
WWKYD.
That's right. That's right. So
She'll be here. Don't worry. I'll get her.
eventually
Yeah, we'll get
we'll
her.
reveal
We'll get
her.
her.
We'll pull like a cloth off her head or something.
It'll be awesome.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think about these?
Okay. First
React.
impressions. You know, I'm a counselor. I hate acronyms, but I also love them. So I'm immediately drawn to the acronyms. Also really love the whole like first edition thing. Like I'm in on the ground floor. I really like that kind of thing. Also kind of like this one because we've already done the first step of this one and it has less steps. So and I like that the second step is more of just like a yes, me and go. And discourages imposter syndrome. So, I mean, that's kind of cool.
Yes.
The ACA also kind of makes me mad sometimes. So it's like immediately I'm kind of like a sway away from them sometimes. So I have to keep that in mind because I don't think that's very ethical at all. Me just
Needs to
making
be
the decision.
automatically.
Right. So also I also really like the fact that this one's new and I'm a little turned off by the fact that ACA is from 2014. However, with all this being said, I do think a lot of the like both of them have really similar commonalities.
They have a lot in common actually.
Now cons of this new one. I'm not sure I want to spend a whole session with my client being like, "Hi, I have a podcast. Let's talk about." Like I feel like this one's a little bit more personal. Like like it like as far as ethical dilemmas go, this would be
Sure.
maybe more appropriate for like the in its pure form right now, right? So a little bit more appropriate for like an ethical dilemma that pertains to the client. Not that this doesn't pertain to all of my clients, but like, do I really need to talk to them about this? If it comes up, then yes, right? But if it doesn't come up, I mean, it's that there's back to that sense of autonomy. Do I need to direct them to it? Because I feel like that's a little unethical in itself. Me just like directing them to my pod. Here, look at my podcast. I think that's a little ethically gray.
I know, right? We could talk about how it's like sits on either side. Okay, before you talk about that, dig into that. What I'm hearing from you is that there's pros and cons to kind of each of these models, right? Like you notice one you feel a certain way about, one you feel a different way about. And I agree with some of your reactions, right? Like I have always felt like the decision-making models that are taught in school and that are sort of reiterated in some of the trainings are so unrealistic for just your average ethical situation, particularly like what you're saying with a client in a session, right? In that relationship. But really, I think our ethical dilemma is more about like our professional responsibility, right? And then how that could impact our clients. Not necessarily about something that is directly within the client session or something that the client has shared, right?
Okay.
And so I think that we actually have the space to go through the longer ethical decision-making model in this case. And I want to incorporate some of it from the brief one because to me, I really like the trust your clinical judgment and experiences as an item, right? Because that exactly what you said, it sort of helps how did you say it? It helps kind of bring down imposter syndrome or it combats
like
imposter
kind of
syndrome?
discourage imposter syndrome that might make you freeze in the
Yeah,
moment and
exactly.
make you
And
not
here it's
confident.
like saying like, look, you you have a clinical judgment, you have experiences, you have training, you've finished grad school, like trust yourself, like you will have
Right.
an intuition about this and that can be a part of this decision making. And I like that that's like a part of it. I also really like the encouragement to sort of self-reflect on the potential decision. Like so you go down and you figure out, okay, here's what I think I'm going to do and then give yourself a minute to sort of self-reflect on that
Mhm.
emotionally, what's coming up for you? How does that sitting with you? Are you like, yeah, I'm feeling really peaceful about that? Or are you noticing that you're still feeling a little bit, there's still something that's kind of bothering me, right?
Yeah.
So I like those parts of it for sure. I think that the have a conversation with your client about the ethical dilemmas could totally be adapted to say, have a conversation with your client or have a conversation with a colleague, right? Like depending upon the
Mm.
dilemma, like
Mhm.
we could change really that step to say, this is either a consult spot or specifically with your client conversation. I do like
Mm.
that with certain ethical dilemmas that are within the client relationship.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. But maybe this is actually a place to consult, with another professional too.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
let's go through let's go through a model.
Okay.
So either way, at some point, we need to consult the code.
Great.
Both of these models say that, and that's really always been the place that we've been taught to start. And I think it makes sense, right?
Right.
Go through the code. Is there anything that directly addresses your situation and just answers the
Mhm.
question for you? Because
Right.
sometimes it does.
Right.
It's a clear, like, yeah, this is what you do, this is what you don't do.
Right. Which is something that I don't think I think about a lot. I think that it's almost like discouraging for me to go to the code or go back to the code because part of my ethics education has been, I mean, it's all centered around consultation. And there's one thing about consultation, it's that there's a lot of questions and there's like a lot of interpretation and there's a lot of talking and there's a lot of gray area that you're just like you never really come to like a solid answer.
Sure.
So I find that I don't go to the code of ethics very often just because I forget that sometimes it's literally written in black and white.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. And I think that it's easy to just forget that. But it totally is, right? There are some things that are just straightforward. Here it is. Here's the answer
Right.
to your question. And
Don't have sex with your client.
that's
Just don't do it.
a great one.
It's crazy. I feel like a lot of people being
It's
gone
right
to
there in black and
yeah,
white.
yeah,
In like
having gone
four
to it,
different places. No joke.
right, having the again, the ethics education that I have had, that's never been a gray area,
No,
never.
no.
Although it's not that way for other people. So maybe I should, Karen. Maybe I should really
Yeah,
start to get more in the habit of looking at ACA Code of Ethics because I don't want to be those people. I don't
I
want to
know.
ever be
You
those
wanna
people. I don't
show up
never
you wanna
never
show
want to
up to
get
that
to that point.
consult, right, with your professor or whoever you're
Right.
consulting with, your super "I have a real ethical question," and they're like, that's it."
No.
Kind of
Right.
embarrassing, right?
Right.
Yeah. So for
Yeah.
me, it just makes sense to, like, go there first, make sure I'm not dumb, you know, check check myself with the
Okay.
black and white, and then if I still don't have an answer, then I'll go talk to, like, another
Okay.
therapist or a supervisor or, some other professional because I don't wanna look dumb,
Right. Right.
for sure.
Okay. Let's get into it. Let's do it.
Okay, so as we mentioned before, the code of ethics that is the most current version is the ACA's 2014 code of ethics. Now, there's like a TCA code of ethics and it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
We could do that too, but
No, we don't have
I
time for
gotta
that.
pick one. We don't have time for all that. But if you have a real ethical dilemma and you think, you need to explore it, you probably should, right? Check them
Yeah,
all.
do it.
But in this case, we're just going to use the ACA and we're going to go through like which ones might be related to what we're doing here. So
Okay.
let's start in the beginning because the first section is about the counseling relationship. And that's the place that I actually think that we could potentially have an impact, right? So
Okay.
you
We
know,
got
here, what might apply to our dilemma? I
okay.
think there are several
So
in
we got
this.
A1A, the primary response. So this is primary responsibility.
Mhm.
We're under client welfare. The primary responsibility of counselors is to respect the dignity and promote the welfare of clients.
Right.
We kind of talked about that.
Yeah. We talked about that when we were talking about the values and the principles. And here it is again in black and white. This is
Hmm.
your primary job, right? And so
Hmm.
this goes back to my thoughts about, okay, we are both active counselors, actively
Hmm.
seeing clients with kind of current client relationships, and we're adding into our lives this podcast that is about our profession, where we are not being therapists in the strict sense. We are not actively
Right.
providing therapy during our podcast, but we are being ourselves. And so our primary responsibility still is this,
Yeah.
promoting the dignity and welfare of clients. So we still have to like keep that in mind.
Okay. I
Okay.
think
Uh,
intention has a really big part to play in this one.
Say that
Like,
again.
because I said I feel like intention has a really big part to play in this one
Yes.
because it's kind of like I can't really I mean, we talk about this all the time. Can't really don't know. I can't not know what I don't know. So I don't know how I
Yeah.
cannot think of a way that I haven't already said that this might impact the welfare of the client. And even still, right? Like even if the client does come across this and it's like she's not really who I thought she were. It doesn't necessarily invalidate the work that we've likely already done together. So,
But it
I
might
mean, it might
impact their welfare if they have an experience of listening to an episode of this podcast and think to themselves, "Oh my gosh, that therapist is just not who I thought she was. I've
mm,
been, sharing and trusting a person who is now obvious to me to be
has
different."
has vastly different political views than me. But
Yeah.
again,
Well,
that
hold on, hold
mm,
on. Hold
mhm,
that thought because I think it connects to the next code, which
okay.
is A4B. That was the next one
Okay.
that showed up for me as like relevant
Yeah.
personal values. So this is
Okay.
this is under avoiding harm and imposing values. And it specifically says that counselors are aware of and avoid imposing their own values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So it's
Ah.
all about respecting the diversity of clients and so on and so forth. So I think this is exactly where this, could impact clients, right? Is we are going to be sharing our personal values, attitudes,
Mhm.
beliefs, and behaviors and mannerisms on this podcast, which are things that we don't include generally in our therapeutic relationship with a client,
Mhm.
right? We pull a lot of that back.
Yeah.
We pull a lot of that out of the sessions because
You
that's
know,
not what we do.
right. I'm just thinking if a client were to come to me and say, "Hey, I listened to your podcast and I had no idea that were that you cussed or that like
Yeah. That's a good
you
one. Stick with that example.
yeah, okay. We'll go with the easy one cuz honestly, I kind of think that having that conversation with the client could open up could open them up to more benefit. Like
Sure.
like
I can see that. Yeah.
because I cuss and because I how does that make you feel? Like
Yeah.
that we are very different people. Does that invalidate the work that we've already done? And I think it honestly adds kind of to their autonomy, like and their sense
For
of
sure.
autonomy. Like in my practice, I'm very much about like it's not really me that's doing this work. You can attribute it to
Mhm.
me all you want, but I'm going to return responsibility right back to you because
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing any work.
Yeah.
So or at least that's my goal.
Yeah.
So, I'm kind of feeling good about it. For a second there, I was like, "Ugh, we need to shut this off." Just but now I'm
Well,
kind of
let
feeling
me
good about it because Okay,
let me
good.
throw it at you. Let me throw
Oh
something at you.
God.
Here's what I think about. Like I agree that it could totally be a really healthy and really therapeutic conversation, right? If a client comes to you and says, "Hey, I heard you on your podcast and I didn't know that you cussed and like that was really, you know, uncomfortable," and you can have that conversation with them, right? You could process
Mhm.
that with them. I think that's a great conversation to have in that therapeutic setting. But what if they listen to the podcast and then they just no show? They never come back and they are so uncomfortable and so kind of put off by now experiencing or thinking that they've experienced the real you that they just don't even come back to session, right?
Mm.
They say, "Well, look at the, I didn't know this is how therapists were. I didn't know how this is how Jasmine was, or I didn't know this is how Karen was, and I'm so uncomfortable. I'm not even going to have that conversation with her. I'm just not going to come back."
Mm.
Now client welfare has been impacted, right? Because they have
Yeah, but, like,
left the therapy.
is that on me?
I mean,
Like,
it could.
that's
My point is it could be if you haven't thought about it,
hmm.
and that's
Well,
why
we're
we're
thinking
thinking
about
about
it,
it.
so so,
That's why
check.
we're thinking about it. Because it could
Okay.
be, right? Because if you just didn't even think that that was a possibility, that's where it becomes like you didn't think about your client and how it
Right,
could impact them.
right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, just give me a moment to really think about it. We'll take a moment of silence.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
You
I've thought
ready?
about it.
Okay.
Next.
Yeah. Well, the next one's a doozy too. So we're
Okay.
still in A. Why do you think about this
God.
one? A5E, personal virtual relationships with clients. Counselors are prohibited from engaging in a personal virtual relationship with individuals with whom they have a current counseling relationship, for example, through social and other media.
Oh, I'm just not talking to him. No way. Clients know that to begin with me.
Okay, but are we talking to them through media,
Oh.
through this podcast? Is
No, because
this
I don't think it's interactional.
okay?
Like, I
Okay,
don't
but
think that that
what if
that
they become our Patreon member?
Oh.
Or they message us, or they send us an email.
But the flip side of that is not allowing them to become a Patreon member, and then that deals with client autonomy.
I
Like,
know,
and that's
and
not
equity,
good.
and
So and equity exactly. So you just, like, don't listen to this. Like, that's not good. That's way worse.
well, it's
So
not good. I don't know if it's worse, but
I feel like it's worse.
I don't think it's better, that's for sure. No, you're bringing up an excellent point, right? Which is what is the way to manage that, right? So if we are prohibited from engaging in a personal virtual relationship with individuals that we have a current counseling relationship, that means that, to me, I interpret this has a lot more to do with like social media, right? And like having an ongoing sort of social media presence with them.
Right.
This is something that I think therapists have been dealing with recently where there are more
Yeah.
therapists now like engaging with social media in the sense of like they have an Instagram profile and they have followers. I mean, you cannot necessarily control whether or not your clients engage with you through that social media. In fact, oftentimes that's how clients find them, right? So a client
Right.
might become a follower of a professional's social media profile, and that's how they then decide, "Oh, I want
Right.
to actually work with this professional in therapy." What does the professional do? Say, "Now you have to unfollow me?" Like, "No."
I
Right?
think yeah, right. I think relationship is probably the most important word here.
Okay.
Like
Tell me
what
more.
is yeah, like what is a relationship
Yeah.
online, you know?
Yeah.
Because and I think this also goes back to
And the word
these
personal. I think the
right.
word
Right.
personal is super
Oh
important
yeah.
here too.
Yeah.
Personal relationship, right? Not just
Right.
any relationship because I have I have virtual relationships with my clients in the sense that I have a virtual client, I see them virtually, but that's professional, right? Any
Right.
communication that I have with them virtually is strictly professional. It's not a
Yeah.
personal relationship.
Yeah.
It's in
And
the
I think
context
I
of our
yeah.
professional.
Then yeah. because we're still professionals. Even though we're in podcast, this wouldn't be like a personal thing. Like we are still, I think it would be different if we were like not presenting as professionals, but we are presenting as professionals. And I think if we keep that consistent, I think it's good. I think it's fine.
That's true. That's a good point, right? So we are presenting this podcast very obviously as professional counselors, right?
Mhm.
We are including our credentials. We are, you know, informing everyone that we have these credentials. We're speaking about the profession. We are being ourselves as individuals, and we're being clear that this is not therapy. This is, not at all what we're doing in the
Yeah.
podcast itself, but we are still professionals, you know, w- everywhere we go.
Yeah.
That's maybe one of
Right.
the things that just comes up with being
Right.
in this profession, by the way.
I'm not asking my client to dinner, or like I'm not they're not my friend. And
Right.
making that very clear in your practice, super important. I immediately say we are not friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do not contact me.
Well, do
Um,
you speak to your clients now about, like, social media and whether or not they can friend you on social media and what you will do if a client reaches out to you via social media? Like, what do you
I
do in those scenarios?
so I'm very much a I'm a play therapist. So I'm very much a limits aren't needed until they're needed. Um, so I don't say it because I don't like a lot of the time for me, it's not common. It doesn't really come up. A lot of my clients really even like my teenage clients, most of them just understand the like she is not my friend
Yeah.
kind of thing. So it doesn't really come up for me. So I don't take time to talk about it. I know a lot of therapists do, but
Mhm.
I just try to make it very clear that I never try to make this relationship look like friends. Um, we can it's not that it's not a good relationship, but I constantly refer to our relationship as a therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
I never refer to it as a friendship. I'm
Yeah.
very careful about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it
So
comes up, I'll say something, but not
yeah.
until it comes up.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the next code. So the next one I think kind of might connect is under A6, A6B, extending counseling boundaries. So this A6,
Okay.
this section is about managing and maintaining boundaries and professional relationships. And so
Okay.
A6B is saying that counselors consider the risks and benefits of extending current counseling relationships beyond conventional parameters. Examples
Mm,
include attending a client's formal ceremony like a wedding or commitment ceremony or graduation, purchasing a service or product provided by a client, accepting the unrestricted bartering, which is in black and white, and
mm,
visiting a client's ill family member in the hospital, right? So those are examples of
mm,
extending
mm-mm,
said boundaries, right? And in extending these boundaries, counselors take appropriate professional precautions such as informed consent, consultation, supervision, and documentation to ensure that judgment is not impaired and no harm occurs.
okay.
What comes up for you here?
As far as the podcast, I guess this
Yeah,
would
like
be
this is applicable?
barely. I think that this is a bit of an extension beyond the boundaries of the conventional relationship because it's one other way that they can like connect with me, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Even if the connection is not necessarily like back and forth, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm not engaging
it's
really.
asynchronous. Yeah.
Yeah. Um it is an extension of boundaries, but I definitely so but I think it's a gray area at best and then or at most. But all of the examples that they gave are very big. They to me when I read that I cringe, like, no way.
Right. To me, the
No way.
examples they give are no's for me as well. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't do any of
Never.
yeah.
Never. I've heard of that happening,
Yeah.
and I think that's great if that's something that you're comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with that at all.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
think that's that is just not for me. So I think it's an extension, but I think it's like kind of the transactional thing. Like, is it a true like it's an interaction, but it's asynchronous. So
Yeah.
it's like I'm not really engaging with them. Like they are engaged, they're choosing to engage with me. So therefore, those boundaries are theirs, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
putting it out there. There's not much I can really do about it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We've got some in 7 roles and
Ace
relationships at
7AB.
group, institutional, and societal levels. So
Oh my God.
I kind of think A and B a little bit, right? This is about
Okay.
when appropriate, counselors advocate at individual group, institutional, and societal levels to address potential barriers and obstacles that inhibit access or the growth and development of clients. Like I kind of feel like that's kind of one of the points of our podcast, right? Is to
Right.
address barriers of
Mhm.
access and understanding. And so that's actually kind of what we're trying to do with this.
Good. Check.
Yeah, and then B is about confidentiality and advocacy. So, counselors obtain client consent prior to engaging in advocacy efforts on behalf of an identifiable client to improve the
Okay.
provision of services and to work towards removal of systemic barriers and obstacles that inhibit client access, growth, and development.
No identifying information. Stay away.
Yeah, and this I think really applies specifically to like if you're engaging in advocacy for a particular client. Like I can think of a situation like let's say I have a client who I'm working with and they are considering divorcing an abusive spouse and I am trying to help them get into a shelter maybe,
Mhm.
right? I might be doing some advocacy on their behalf, or I might want to. Like, let's say I might want to say, well, I know of a shelter. I could call them and find out if they have space or, if they are accepting, folks in and
Mhm.
what the steps might be for you to go there. I would need to then, what this is telling me is I need to obtain client consent before I do that. Right. So
Right.
before I like call the shelter and say, hey, I have this client that if you have space for, I'd love to send over. I need to talk to the client about that first
Right.
before I do that. So this to me has like this specific client sort of thing
Right.
in
It's
here.
that
And
identifying information
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And we're gonna
And
stay away
well,
from
and
that. We've
getting their
already decided.
consent before I do that, right? I don't just like do
Yeah.
that for them and tell them, hey, I already called the shelter and they have space for you. I ask them first. I talk to them about it first. Hey, I
Yeah.
know of the shelter. I'd like to do this for you. Is that okay? And get their consent beforehand. I don't just
Mhm.
advocate for them without their consent. So this to me applies so much to like an individual. And what we're doing is so general. It's not
Mhm.
really about like any one client.
Right. And it's important to keep it general,
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
yeah, keep it general, speak in general terms. Even if you're talking about like a specific experience, you can check out I mean, definitely our interview with Elisa, and she's huge into advocacy, but also our interview with Kim Knox. She talks about like a client who she talks about a specific client. She doesn't name names, no identifying information, but she lost them to suicide, right? That's a specific experience, but I would say it's general enough, no identifying information, and the frame was not advocacy. The frame was not anything other than uh like she brought it to the general,
Yeah.
right? Like she took that experience and then applied it to a general self-reflection for herself and her career. Wasn't just because it was one specific experience, one specific client. I think it's about not staying in that lane. Move somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we got B1B and
Yeah.
B1C. Okay.
Uh,
B1B, respect for privacy. Counselors
yeah.
respect the privacy of prospective and current clients. It's kind of like what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Request private information that's going to be beneficial. I never want to talk about clients on our podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
No
Um,
specifics for sure. Maybe experiences, but from my perspective and no identifying information. So then we have B1C, respect for confidentiality, protect the man, there's a lot on confidentiality in
kidding, right?
Yeah, it's like the whole thing is just like,
The whole
just
section.
don't talk about it. Don't. Just don't.
Don't.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
So we won't.
So this is about
Okay.
being like, yeah, protecting that confidential information, respecting privacy, all of that, like making sure that that's constant. And so I think that's just something we mitigate by like what you're saying, just never giving specifics of anything. If we talk about specific activities or
Mhm.
things with clients, we're very, very general. We're speaking from our own perspective. We are not, we're being very thoughtful about um, how we discuss any client interactions. And I think a
Right.
part of that also goes into just being maybe deliberate in changing identifiers where
Oh,
appropriate.
yeah. Yeah.
If if we
If
need to protect
right.
a client, if it's a story that really needs to be shared for some reason, then just change some identifiers to
Yeah.
protect that client's privacy and confidentiality. It's like
Yeah.
the story doesn't need to change. Like what's the point of the story if it can't be told without protecting client privacy and
Right.
confidentiality?
Because then
Then it
it's
can't be
not
told.
about right. It's not about you then. Like
Yeah.
it's not because we need to keep this about us and not about the client. So if you are questioning that, then Karen, you need to tell me. But
Yeah.
not on the podcast,
Cut
but
it.
you if you're cut it or just don't
Just
like
don't even say it.
yeah, just don't say
Yeah.
it. I think that goes right into the next one that you have listed here, B7A, respect for privacy. So, information shared in a consulting relationship is discussed for professional purposes only. Again, just change
Yeah.
information if the story
Yeah.
really needs to be told. And if you can't tell the story without identifying, question whether this needs to, like, why are you telling this story?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
we need to keep that in mind when we're editing.
For sure. Yes. And I think this is something to be sure we talk to our interviewees about ahead of
Mhm.
interviews, right? Is letting them know, and just reiterating it, right? If they're professionals in our field, they already know about this, but just,
Right.
while in some ways our interviews may feel like a case consultation, it's not a purely private case consultation. This is for
Right.
public consumption, which means
Right.
we have to be even more considerate of privacy and confidentiality when we're having those conversations with other professionals about their experiences, their client relationships, right? And reiterating that's our responsibility then, right? To reiterate that with our interviewees that, hey, this is how we're handling um those kinds of conversations, right? About
Right.
client stories or your experiences, right?
Yeah. And just cutting it off
Yeah.
when they start talking about it. Because I don't know anyone who's gonna do that, but I don't know all the people that we're gonna interview. So
Yeah.
okay, moving
So
on.
section C
Section
is
C.
professional responsibility in general. And I feel like there's so much in this section that applies because this is, to me, one of the meaty areas that might apply to us because this is about dealing with the public and other professionals, right? Like that's what section C is about. So
Okay.
section 1 and B is about your professional responsibility to clients, respecting the dignity of clients, and blah, blah, blah. But section C is about your professional responsibility to the public and other professionals. And so there's some things in this section that pop up for sure. Um, just our responsibility to know the code, know
Yeah.
the laws that apply to us, be familiar with them. Like that's a professional responsibility. So kind of what we're doing in this exercise is about like making sure that we are as familiar with the codes and the laws that are in fact potentially relevant to what we're
Right.
doing, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what we're doing now.
Okay.
So let's see. C, I found a couple in C that I thought were maybe relevant. Let's see. Oh, advertising and soliciting clients.
Oh.
I don't know that our podcast is intended to be an advertisement or solicitation of
No.
clients. We've talked about this, like it's not really, but it could potentially be seen that way by others. And that's
Yeah.
why I wanted to include some of these. Right? And especially because some of our interviewees, we might be asking them to, plug themselves or some professional
Right.
affiliation that they have, and that kinda maybe could be seen as advertising or soliciting clients. So, I mean, you tell
This
me what you think
is
of the ones that I've
ah,
listed out here. What do you think?
yeah. I think that this whole thing, like advertising to clients, I think this is another reason kind of why ACA makes me frustrated. Because like, especially I think for private practitioners, like
Mhm.
how do you get
I
around
know.
this and have a business? Like,
I know.
because we're
It's
business
complicated.
owners, like this one always gets really sticky for me, even without the podcast. Like it's really sticky for me because what is advertising? And then if you don't advertise, what like how are you going to get clients? And
I
if
know.
you don't and then you could just take it even further. Like if you don't advertise for yourself, like your discernment counseling, right? Like people don't know about that. Is that really doing the best for the
I
public
know.
and the client? Like
Yep.
is that the best? Because that goes completely against like the
Yeah.
principles. So
Yeah.
I just don't like this section.
Well, hold on. I feel
Not
like
the whole
your
section, not
feelings
the whole
are getting in
section.
your way a little bit. Your reaction feelings are getting in your way a little bit because I don't think it
Story of my
says
life.
don't advertise. It says when you advertise, these are the things you need to do, right? And the first one is you need to be accurate, right? With your
Okay.
credentials, right? And that
Okay.
is,
Check.
I sure think we are doing, right? We're going to be very
Yes.
accurate. We are including our credentials and we are going to make sure that that's really clear. Just like we're not going to misrepresent other professionals' credentials, right? When we
No.
interview another professional, we are going to include their credentials in an accurate way. We're not going to say LPCA because it's not a real thing. So if we
Right.
interview an LPC associate, that's what it's going
That's
to
what
say.
we're gonna say. We
Include
will
who their
not
supervisor is because that's what you
right.
have to say,
Right.
right?
Because that's it. We will not we will I'm gonna tell you right now, everyone, we will not be interviewing people who are
Not credentialed.
not credentialed. Right.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry if anyone feels mean
they can
about
go on
this,
other
but
podcasts, but just
that's
not this one.
fine. You have autonomy.
Yeah,
if
that's right.
you if a life coach comes to us
Mhm.
and says, "I am credentialed through Big Bill's Life Coach Barn or whatever life coaches, the certification process. Like if you
Oh
bring
my
me a
gosh.
certificate that of completion, you're not making it. You are not making it on this show. We will
Right?
not advertise for that.
But
So,
here's why, because of these codes, right? That's
yes.
why.
Right.
Because we are
Right.
complying with some of these codes about being
Right.
accurate, and we wanna be really accurate about the types of professionals that we're interacting with, that we're interviewing, that we are, so we don't wanna mislead anybody, right? That's the whole point. We don't want people to think that you're not hearing from a real professional, right? So
Right.
that's our due diligence as well, is I think this also connects with making due diligence, like, if we're interviewing somebody that maybe neither of us know personally, we might need to, like, double check their credentials, right? Not just take them at their word, but also make
Okay.
sure that we are double checking their credentials, that they are in fact licensed as they say they are before we
Yes.
post their license as what it is, right? And so I'm
Right.
speaking of people like
Okay.
maybe we don't know personally, like there are plenty of people that we know personally are like on the up and up and we don't have to do
Right.
that extra legwork, but
Uh,
there
Right.
may be a
But
time
with the
we start to interview people that neither one of us knew personally. We need
right.
to check them out.
And right. And checking out so people we don't know and checking out or aren't familiar with, even if we like know them, like, or like someone knows them or something,
Yeah.
checking those people out, but
Mhm.
also checking out like what not just what their credentials are, but like if they've like you can look it up on BHEC, like you can look it up wherever you're it's all the public information if they are in trouble or
Yeah,
something. Like we don't want to be
sure.
advertising for someone who's currently under investigation.
Right.
So we don't want to give that.
Who's
Okay.
suspended, right?
I didn't
Yeah,
even think about that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point though. That's a good point.
So there's a couple in here that I think are like, you know, I don't know, like, I don't know how you feel about this one, but C C3C, statements by others, that we try to make reasonable efforts to ensure that statements made by others about them or about the counseling profession are accurate. Like this, I think just
Oh.
connects with like when we're interviewing, the importance of
Yeah.
like making sure that the things that we're talking about are accurate. And I think fortunately that's the point of what we're trying to do is be accurate
Sure.
and be
Sure.
real about what we're talking about. But it's just interesting that like that's in here, right? This trying to be um trying to ensure that not just your own statements, but the people that you're talking to, so the people we interview are also being accurate about the profession
Yeah.
and themselves, right? So, and then, okay, here's one that you might not, uh, be frustrated with, right? Is when we go further down. So,
Okay.
CE, products and training advertising. Hey, thanks for listening to Therapy Tea. We had so much to say about our ethical decision making process, surprise, that we had to break this into 2 parts. Please look out next week for our release of part 2 of this ethics episode on Patreon only. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with anyone you know who might be interested in what we're talking about here. Thank you so, 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 so much for choosing to be a Patreon subscriber. You're our favorite.